Okay, so it's so nice to be here with everybody today to share our journey for DevOps. We'll tell you a little bit about who we are to start, why we did what we did, some of our challenges, and we'll take a little deep dive into terraforming. And looking back, of course, we've got some war stories and lessons learned to share. I'm Lisa. Nice to meet all of you. I'm a bit of a contradiction in the IT world. My background is not technical. Uh, yet I find myself the head of the software engineering team in Petronas, and we build bespoke applications for the Petronas group of companies. Because we do so much development, we inevitably look into automation, we look into DevOps, we look into terraforming, we look into agile implementation, and all that good stuff. And as you can see from the right, I don't actually do that much actual work, which is good because I'm not very technical. But most of my job entails removing bottlenecks from my team, getting funding from my team, explaining how things work to people in our business who are also non-technical. And but I leave all the good work that we do to Shafiq, who will introduce himself next.
Thank you, Lisa. Hi, I'm Shafiq. I'm head of DevOps engineering in Petronas. So I'm actually working together with Lisa in transforming a new way of working within the organization towards agile and DevOps. So I think that's the short introduction from me. Over back to you, Lisa.
Thank you, Shafiq. So before I get into what it is that we did in DevOps, I want to talk a little bit about why we did what we did. And if I think about it, I talk more often about why we need DevOps in our organization more than how it is that we do DevOps. And with senior stakeholders, I talk about minimizing waste and uh, maximizing the acceleration towards delivery features to our users quickly. But when I talk to my own IT counterparts, I talk about the human suffering that is involved in not doing DevOps. And sometimes I'll show them this picture. So this is probably my favorite picture to explain why it is we need DevOps. I think for anyone who's ever been in IT, you can relate to some aspect of this photo. When you're on holiday or it's 2 a.m. and there's an outage, it doesn't matter where you live in the world, it's always 2 or 3 a.m. when there's an outage. So we talk about how important automation is, how important it is that we have control over our systems. We talk about creating safe systems of work. And that's what DevOps is all about. That's what we're trying to create. And I think that when I do this, it helps to make an emotional connection to the people whose work I'm trying to change, whose tooling I'm trying to change, whose ways of working I'm trying to change. So I feel that it's as much a technical change as it is a cultural change, as many people have said. So, what is it exactly, DevOps, for us in Petronas? So, for us, it's a stream that turns hypotheses into a technology service or product so that our customers can enjoy that value as quickly as possible. Uh, some of you might recognize that I took many of these words from the DevOps handbook. And why is it that we need a definition when something is so easily Googled, when something is so easily found online, and it's so popular in the media today? You know, everybody more or less in the IT world knows what DevOps is. But in the early days, we had a lot of misconceptions about what DevOps was and what it wasn't. I'll give you some examples. There were people that thought that if you put a dev guy and an ops guy in the same team, that DevOps would just magically happen. Another misconception was that some people thought DevOps and Agile were the same thing. Some people even thought that if you implemented DevOps, that would guarantee you a product that users would love. So maybe DevOps is a little bit of these things, but it's not the entire picture. So we had to be really clear about what it is DevOps would help our business to accomplish. And what is our business anyway? I Before I get into our journey, I want to give everybody an idea of the IT shop that we're running here. It's pretty big in our part of the world as far as enterprises go. We serve the whole Petronas group of 50,000 users domestically and internationally. And these are some of the statistics. We got 700 projects for IT running at any one time. We have more than 2,000 applications for just 50,000 users, which is a lot. And in IT, we've got about 1,800 staff and 18,000 tickets a month for our estate. And this doesn't even include some of the service request tickets. These are just tickets to do with incidents and outages and so on. If we include the rest of the tickets, not including this category, that's about 50,000 tickets a month. So the case for change and the implementation for DevOps for us is a big one. It's a real one, and there's lots of value that we stand to gain by implementing what we did. This is a high level depiction of our journey to DevOps, so to speak. So we started in 2017, um, and we started like many people do, I think, because in IT, it's always very overwhelming when you're running such a legacy shop. There's always issues, there's always things to do, there's always new projects coming in, and there never is time to pay down that technical debt or introduce initiatives that will improve developer productivity. So no one ever had time to focus. So what we did was we took out a team. We gave them 5 applications that IT had control over: the funding, the releases, the features, and so on. And we told them, look, just take this, implement the tooling of your dreams, and then if it works, we'll extend this to the rest of the organization. So that's what they did. And in fact, it didn't even really take that long. I remember actually asking the team, so what is it we're actually going to buy and how much is it going to cost us? And I got a response within 24 hours. So the team had obviously been thinking about this for a very long time. And I think that's one of the key learnings for me. A humbling key learning was that I think developers, good developers especially, and technical guys, they do know what it is they need to make their lives better, to make their work more productive, to preserve the flow of their work. So I think the best thing we can do as leaders is to just give them that space to create and to improve and to roll out the changes that they need to roll out. So we shielded this team from incoming work, and we let them get on with the tooling. And the successes that they accomplished, we propagated that. We did lighthouse events, we did show and tells, and 2019 and 2020 were all about uh, implementing DevOps at scale. So today we are more than 200 products on the tooling. More teams are practicing, and granted, the teams are practicing DevOps in varying degrees of maturity. I think we realized early on that agile was also a precursor to practicing this. So we invested a lot in agile certification and training as well, so that people could maximize the use of the tooling, because it wasn't just a technical change, it was a people and process change. So I think it's exceeded all of our expectations. So the question is, I guess, where does that bring us to today? Just to give you an impression of the activity around DevOps that's going on today, from really having nothing much at all back in 2018 when we started measuring this, to doing a whole lot of it today. And I know a lot of these metrics, like 273 deploys a day, doesn't really say much about how much value monetarily wise that we're adding to the business, but it does say a lot in terms of the confidence and the maturity of the teams, in terms of how they're using the tool sets, how they're introducing their changes, how they're deploying to production. And I think I'm just so infinitely proud of my teams when I look at these metrics and all that they've accomplished since 2017. DevOps. We love our tools. But I'm not going to go through our entire tool set. Yeah, I'm going to hand over to Shafiq shortly to do a deep dive on terraforming. I just want to level set that towards the end of 2020, we had more than almost 200 products onboarded to our CI/CD tooling and achieved a lot of success in terms of our application related automation. But we did not really make a lot of headway except for a few isolated POCs here and there around infrastructure automation. So inevitably, this led to a lot of difficulties that we still continue to have, like environment readiness. And when those environments were ready, they weren't consistent, they weren't predictable, and you just go back and forth with the operations team in terms of getting what you want. So we knew this was almost like the final piece of the puzzle that we had to implement within our DevOps tooling. And I'm so happy to pass you on to Shafiq, who'll tell you a lot more about what we've done with Terraform.
All right, thanks, Lisa. Okay, no matter what we are trying to accomplish here in Petronas, no matter how big or small, all adventures started with one small step, right? So here I'm going to walk you through on our journey in implementing Terraform in our organization. So in the early term, we took a step back and we looked back on our current processes, how we implement the infrastructure design, the RBAC, the policies that have been set up, so that we could come up with a solid due diligence in our IAC tool selection. All right. And we also collaborated with our enterprise architecture, cybersecurity, the cloud team, as well as the network team to make sure that everything were covered from the beginning. All right. As Petronas is currently having a hybrid cloud solution, which is we are currently on Azure and AWS, we actually need to make sure that every single elements must be covered. All right. And as we transition from the early term to mid-term plan, we had actually defined our standard reference architecture for our basic web application, microservices like, for example, Kubernetes, and function as a service for our serverless application, which then we converted into several templates where the requester would be able to actually select for their infrastructure provisioning. All right. And also, we started to do testing in our sandpit environment, and we have selected a few of our products in the pilot rollout in making sure that our implementation is working successfully as what we have planned earlier. Moving on to the long term, we started gaining confidence. The team is now getting our new IAC, Azure, and AWS landing zone, which is currently at 80% readiness for our cloud migration initiative, meaning that the Terraform will move from being the exception to the standard way of we automated provisioning for all of our future workloads. Now, I guess some of this won't be alien to all of you since we are at the HashiCorp conference, right? But these are important for us to actually declare clearly to everyone that we are all aligned on the most sensible way to proceed, right? So here we are practicing these five principles and best practices in our current implementation, which is the first one is the plan and apply. So basically, this is important for us to make sure the proposed changes match with what we expected before we apply the changes. All right. And the second one, we also put in place the approval gates in our CI/CD pipeline, especially for our apply and destroy command, in a way to control the changes and avoiding any mistakes in future. All right. So the third one is the code structure. Basically, there is no right or wrong in choosing the code structure. Um, it is rather highly dependent on the project type or size, the complexity of the project, how often the infrastructure change, which deployment platform and deployment services that we are using, like for example, the Kubernetes or OpenShift. As we all know, both might require a slightly different approach, right? And lastly, how the environments are grouped. Like for example, is it grouped by environment? Is it grouped by the region? Or is it grouped by the project? All right. And for the naming convention, the use of underscore. All right. Beware that the actual cloud resources have many hidden restrictions in their naming conventions. So we actually cannot use dashes, for example, and some must be camel case. That is, for instance, right? And of course, do not repeat the resource type in the resource name to avoid confusion. And last but not least, the remote state, where it actually refers to the storage of the Terraform configuration state file in a location like, for example, in the AWS S3, in Azure Blob Storage, or the storage container, for instance, right? And this is actually to allow teams collaboration, easier versioning, and to control and audit on your infrastructure changes when you move everything to production. So, as I mentioned earlier, we are currently in the midst of getting our new ISC landing zone for Azure and AWS ready for our cloud migration initiative. And as we all know, a landing zone is a composition of multiple resources, like for example, modules, blueprints, or services that deliver a full application environment, right? So in Petronas, we are adopting Cloud Adoption Framework by Microsoft for our Azure Landing Zone, which help to maintain a set of curated modules. We mainly use module to actually enforce a consistent set of configuration settings and requirements. All right. So here we implemented 5 level structures from level 0 to level 4, which each of these layers serve a different purpose. All right. Like for example, level 0 is the launch pad, which as the at the subscription level that given a privileged access to the workstation or service principles that could be created at that layer, for example. And we also have level 1 is where the security and compliance configuration take place. Like for example, the RBAC, the policies, the OMS monitoring and shared security services, right? And in level 2 is basically for the hub and spokes, as well as the shared services of each environment, and it also refers back to our design document for the backup, the disaster recovery, the Azure Monitor, patch management, and so on. In the level 3 is actually where we manage the application landing zone in a spoke environment, like for example the AKS, the WAF, VM, as well as uh, app service app service plan, right? And in the level 4 is where we manage the deployment of the application, like for example, the Spring Boot, the .NET Core, the microservices, and so on, right? And as we could see, each of this level will have its own agent and its own Terraform state, all right? And the MSI in each layer, we have set to have the read and write access to its own layer, but we also set the read-only access to the previous layer. So actually, the goal is to have a standardized deployment, accelerate the setup and configurations, to set a common practices as well as to set sample and reusable configurations. All right. And we are also following as much as the same structure that we have implemented in our Azure landing zone into our AWS landing zone, which I mentioned earlier, which is it is currently at 80% readiness, and of course with some tweaks to actually complement the differences in those two different platforms. So this is a super high level design for our IAC implementation in Azure Landing Zone. As you can see here, basically all of our Terraform scripts and configuration we stored in our Azure DevOps repo, which will then integrate it into our Azure pipeline for our CI/CD implementation, right? And we also integrated Azure Key Vault for the resource credential and configured into the pipeline to comply with our security standard. All right. And the second one, since we need to make sure that everything that we're going to push to production is properly tested and safe, we also enforce and manage our source code with a pull request for a proper review, and also the approval gates by the relevant parties before pushing to the production. All right. And of course, once approved, the pipeline will then execute it by self-hosted agents in Azure VM by using the rover image from the Docker registry, and it will call the CAF base module in the public GitHub, which refers back to the original script that we put previously. And once everything has been executed and provisioned, it will then store the Terraform state file into the blob storage with state locking enabled. All right. So why we enable the state locking is because we want to prevent the concurrent runs of the Terraform scripts again the same state. We have this issue previously, so I think that's why we implement this in our current design. Okay, and this is our super high level IAC design for our AWS platform. Not much different from Azure. The same tool to store the Terraform script in Azure repo, executing it from the Azure pipeline as well. And we retrieve AWS Secret Manager from the configured pipeline for our security measure, right? and the TF state file will then be stored in S3 bucket. And for this, we are using DynamoDB for the state locking mechanism. And of course, the same process as well. Once the pipeline is approved, the Terraform scripts will be applied in order to provision the required resources. Okay, I've talked about the reference architecture that we defined, the Terraform templates that we created based on that reference architecture. And now, how should we utilize those templates as a catalog? We have come up with a self-service portal where the users would be able to submit the cloud infrastructure provisioning request via a single pane of view, right? And this entire initiative indirectly showed the successful collaboration between our cloud team, especially in coming out with this MVP one of the self-service portal for the last 2 months. All right. And of course, by having this, users just need to go to the portal, select the predefined infrastructure from the catalog, and then they can just submit the request via the portal. And also, they can monitor the status of their request from that portal. And of course, there is still an approval gate to validate the request, as every provisioning has the cost incurred, right? So once approved, the underlying Terraform pipeline will then be triggered. And by having this as well, we have been able to actually remove the approval gates that we have set in our Azure pipelines earlier. Some people say it is never too late to be what we have been. So from a manual SF form, we submit the request via email and everything through email back and forth. And you might get a reply 3 days after that saying more details required, right? Or maybe your infrastructure requested not following standard. And you fix that, you resubmit again, and you get reply in another 3 days. And it will be in the same loop over and over. And in the end, it takes 7 to 10 days, or maybe it could actually take more than 2 weeks to get all the environments ready. By having this self-service portal, everything will be guided and predefined. And based on our pilot rollout, um, it took about 4 to 8 hours for the entire process to be completed. And of course, this will be a continuous improvement, and we will add up additional features to actually allow additional option to be selected by the requester in our upcoming MVPs. And at the end of the day, what we want to have is we should have a full fledged of automation end to end in our infrastructure provisioning to align with our infrastructure as code roadmap. So I think that's all my quick sharing for today. I pass back to Lisa to conclude on our presentation. Over back to you, Lisa.
Wow. I get so excited whenever I see Shafiq present what we've done with Terraform. I mean, look at that form. It's the stuff of nightmares. It's like a horror movie that never ends, and you never get your environments, you never get the infrastructure provisioning, and it just goes on and on in some bureaucracy of form filling. So, I want to talk now a little bit about the kind of lessons learned that we wish we knew, but we didn't quite do as well when we started this whole journey. I've mentioned that agile was almost a prerequisite, but it's like a chicken and egg situation. You can't do agile without DevOps. You can't do DevOps without agile. So I wish that we had embarked on both initiatives at the same time, approached the teaching of people and getting people certified about what agile was and wasn't, because we even had situations where people just reorganized their project plans into sprints, but none of the underlying engineering actually changed, and it was like, yeah, we're agile, we're so freaking agile. so so I think it would have been good to invest earlier in the capability development, which is something that we're doing quite heavily now. The DevOps organization, even though I keep talking about DevOps, Dev and Ops are still very much different departments in Petronas. The I have to say that our work around the self-service portal and Terraform has brought the departments closer together. If I'm really being honest, our early initiatives were very much about Dev trying to get away from Ops and the dependencies and the processes, trying to automate away the work that Ops did for us. But infrastructure provisioning was true collaboration. And we have now our ops counterparts working with us almost every day. I remember a time when I didn't speak to the head of ops, maybe like, once a month or once a quarter. I speak to him almost every day now. And it's true for, I think, every single level of the organization. Meaningful empowerment. Okay, so because we're starting up new foundations and we're building everything from scratch, we have new landing zones, we have the cloud migration project, we have DevOps, we have new tooling, new everything. This tends to make governance and cybersecurity pretty nervous. So I think there is some level of persuasion. I think that we have to uh, engage in and come to a middle ground. I think that giving too much empowerment and too much control does create chaos. And I think people have to be comfortable with the changes that we're implementing. That's why we have manual gates for approval. But one day it might be fully automated. It might be totally no humans checking, and that's the dream, right? Uh, but also, I think whenever we make a mistake, the team has to be given some support and some guidance and flexibility, I think, to work through those mistakes. Very often, whenever we make a mistake, we then end up introducing a new form, a new gate, a new level of approval, and then so on. It never ends. So I think psychological safety and also not having a knee-jerk reaction to introduce more process when mistake happens is something that we still struggle with, and something that I think leaders need to push back on. So that's pretty much it for our presentation. Please feel free to add us on LinkedIn and tell us what you thought. I'd be so happy to connect with any of you to see what we're doing wrong, what we could be doing better, how you approach DevOps and terraforming in your own organization. Thank you very much for having us.